Hey everybody, my name's Kyle Mogstadt. I work for the North Central District of the Christian Missionary Alliance, and welcome to the Three Churches videocast. What we're going to do is have a conversation with three churches and follow them week by week. There are three different churches of different sizes that are located in different settings that are all dealing with the one big coronavirus epidemic. So week by week, we're going to hear what's working, what's not working, and what questions they still have. So we would love your interaction on our North Central District Facebook page. Watch the video, and then there'll be some questions posted there as well where we can hear what's working for you and what isn't working, and what questions and challenges you're still wrestling with. We're going to learn to be the church together in this season. We know that God is up to something good and that God is still with us. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here we go. All right, well, today we are here with three churches who are facing this crisis, and we're just going to take some time and talk to each one of you. Thank you guys for participating. We're excited to hear your story in the weeks to come. And so the first question is, just tell us a little bit about your church, what your role is there. Nate Yoder, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I am the solo pastor here at the Bridge Church in Watertown, South Dakota. We're a community of about 21,000 people. And so we're kind of the hub for everything around this rural area. The church is young. We began the church 8 years ago, and it started with a core group of believers who came out of a church that had closed a few years prior. And that's just kind of a little bit about the church here. We have a variety of ages and technology ability, and so it's kind of an interesting group to get to meet with. It's fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Nate. Greg, this is my pastor, Greg Rhodes. So there's our connection. But Greg, tell us a little bit about you and your church.
Sure. Well, I'm the lead pastor of River Life Church, and that's St. Paul, Minnesota. And we are a 5.5-year-old church plant, so still fairly young. We're predominantly focused on second and third generation Hmong in the Twin Cities. Those are Southeast Asian refugees that started to come in the mid 70s. And we're about 80% Hmong, with about 20% a variety of other ethnicities and backgrounds. I'm the only full-time pastor, and we've got some additional half-time leaders. We have a half-time associate pastor, worship, youth, and kids. And our mission is to bring hope, healing, and growth to second and third gen Hmong. So we're an urban church on the east side of St. Paul. We're an ethnic church, and we're a really young church.
Awesome. I'm one of those 20% that is non-Hmong that attends, my family and I, so we make a little chunk of that. Thanks, Greg. Nate Sickler, what about you? Where are you at?
I'm Nate Sickler. I am one of the team at Riverside Church that's both in Big Lake and Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. We're a multi-campus church, been around for almost 90 years, but has seen a new round of growth and life in the last 15 or so, and I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm the Sauk Rapids campus pastor. I also oversee our small groups as well as our missions.
Awesome. So Nate represents kind of our big church. Greg is our middle-sized church, and Nate Yoder is our smaller church. So we have three churches in three different settings. Big Lake Monticello, just out of the city, River Life Church in the city, and Nate Yoder out in South Dakota, which is not in the city. Let's put it that way. So awesome. Well, we're going to ask a few questions about what's worked, what isn't. We're going to start with Greg Rhodes. So first start off, Greg, with what actually has been working, or what have you been doing in the church the last couple of weeks to kind of adjust to your new normal here?
So for the last 2 weeks, we've been streaming services. We've done a live service with a full band, preaching, announcement, all of that. We've streamed from the church using OBS software, the Open Broadcasting System or software, I forget what it is. And then we've been streaming to Facebook Live. We used a single camera with a dedicated audio feed from the mixer. Services are generally structured like we normally do them: a welcome, 3 songs, some announcements or a reading, a sermon, and then closing with 1 or 2 songs. And so the service has been generally the same type of structure. And then the new thing that we've added the last 2 weeks that has been really good has been interaction online. So for instance, during the welcome, we give shout outs as people are logging into Facebook. We'll give shout outs to them as their names pop up. And then one of the other things is we have our youth director on Facebook the entire time interacting with people, saying hi, how you doing? I give him my sermon notes with highlights, and he'll cut and paste song lyrics, sermon quotes, Bible passages. So we work hard to make our Facebook interactions really, really active.
Cool. So what's worked really well as you've made this transition?
So what's worked really well, first, the online interactions. People have said they have just loved it. And we get over the course of an hour and 20-minute, hour and 15, hour, 20-minute service, we can get hundreds of interactions throughout the service. And yeah, and I've heard over and over again, people are loving that. One thing that has worked that we implemented the second week, because it wasn't very good the first week, was we added a TV on stage. If you've ever seen Andy Stanley preach or some of these mega church pastors, so there's a TV right next to me while I preach, and it's large on a rolling cart, and we display the Bible verses up on that instead of the large projector screen above all of us. And that was great. That worked out really, really well last week. And then one is we just embraced the awkward. So we would make jokes about it being awkward in an empty room, or the band having to play to nobody, and we just laughed about it. And then one fascinating thing after the first week, a parent thanked me. She came by to get some food from our food shelf, and she specifically thanked me for choosing to cancel live services because she didn't want, she felt the tension of kind of choosing between God and her kids. If she came to church, it meant she loved God. If she stayed home, it meant she was protecting her kids and her family. And she appreciated us making that decision to cancel the live in-person services, so she didn't have to.
Wow, that's really cool. How you're processing through that. What hasn't worked well so far? What have been the mega fails so far?
So probably the largest fail was the framing of the video. So in week one, we shot it almost full stage, kind of like we normally do when we broadcast it into our lobby. And it was too big on small screens. It just did not work. So week two, we tightened everything up. We actually put couches on stage. The worship band sat on the couches because we wanted to give the feeling of we wanted to join them in their family room. And we had a much tighter shot. We brought the lyrics to the bottom two lines of the screen, the lowest we possibly could. And that enabled us to get a much tighter shot to feel much more intimate.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Nate Stickler, let's go to you. What have you guys been doing to adjust to this new normal these last few weeks?
We've had a couple of different things happen. First, 2 weeks ago, we chose to stop services like many of our churches did live, but we went just completely broadcast only. But we still had a live service where we had a full worship team, and we had everybody live from a speaking standpoint for announcements and message and things like that. And that worked very well. That's what we're used to. We even had most of the staff and our families as part of the congregation. So the speaker had somebody to interact with, which was nice. But over the following week, we then limited our engagements and our gatherings even more. And that really affected how we ran our service. We used primarily pre-recorded materials from past services for our worship music times, but then also to just limit the number of people in the room, also pre-recorded the message as well. And so the only live thing Sunday morning was two people that did some hosting pre-service. We did 15 minutes of just live kind of combo of announcements and welcome and just hanging out and talking and goofing around. And that really drove Facebook engagement in a significant way for us. and just that interactive piece. There was something other than a countdown or other than just a blank screen for people to see, and so they were excited to see what's going on, and it drove further sharing on Facebook as well, which was really positive and affected our overall engagement pretty significantly. The other adjustment that I think was significant for us from the first week to the second was we limited the number of songs for worship that we did. We found that when we were only broadcasting, that it became awkward for families to have too many songs at once, and so we broke that up a little bit and also honed in the overall time of the service too.
Cool. So if you were to say what worked really well these first couple weeks, what would you say would be like, hey, this was the thing that worked really well for us?
I think our emphasis on Facebook was really positive. We've been utilizing Facebook for a while to post our Sundays live, but the emphasis that we had on hosting as well as on people in the church getting the word out through sharing the video feed and things like that was very positive, as well as the 15-minute banter session, if you will, where we're doing announcements, etc. Pre-service was really positive also. It just gave another interest point for people.
Cool. And where was you guys' epic fail where you're like, oh man, that did not work. We gave it a shot, but it didn't happen this time?
I think we had a computer crash right before our second service this past Sunday. And so what that meant was none of our pre-recorded stuff was able to get out to the feed for a good 15 extra minutes. So we had to kind of just go with it. And the people that, thankfully we had some live people who were able to kind of keep things flowing sort of. But that was a real challenge and a good learn for us. As much as some pre-recorded stuff was positive, technology can fail anywhere. And when it does, it lets you know. So that was pretty rough.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think it takes a lot of humility for all of us to share what went well, but I think it's good for everyone to know whatever size church we are, things still mess up and we're doing things on the fly. And that's kind of the nature of where we are right now. So thanks, Nate. We'll go to the other Nate now, Mr. Yoder. What have you guys been doing to adjust in your smaller church setting these last couple weeks?
Yeah, so Kyle and I were talking before we got started here about how South Dakota sets the trend in the weather patterns for this area. We are not trendsetters for how the COVID has been spreading. We were actually pretty far behind the curve. There's very few cases here. So 2 Sundays ago, the advice from everybody was still, if you're under 250 people, go ahead and meet. And so we did. We met as normal on that Sunday, and we had a great time. There was it was a needed time together anyway because of some things that are happening in our church at the moment, and so it was good. I'm glad we were able to do that. But last Sunday, because things changed pretty quickly, of course, we changed and we decided to go and do online. And so we actually grouped people into smaller kind of house groups. And 10 or less, of course, is what the advice was at that time. And so we grouped people into 10 or less and divided them up, set them up with a host home. We asked for volunteers for that. People who had the technology and the ability to host, and had a lot of good volunteers for that. And then asked for everyone who wanted to be a part of those things. And so we assigned them each a home to go to and set them up that way. And then in order to try to minimize some of the glitches that can happen with computers, we all decided that we would, as a small church, we wouldn't do live streaming. We would do pre-recorded elements for the whole thing. And so that's what we went with. We had our worship leader choose a song list, and we sent that out ahead of time with a YouTube playlist. And then we pre-recorded the sermon and set that up so that they could access that via our YouTube channel as well, and made that happen that way. And so that's how we went about it.
Cool. What worked really well, did you find, with the way you guys went about it?
Yeah, so being able to gather together, even if it was micro gathering, that was really well received. Our people really were bummed about not being able to meet together as a large group. And so that interaction of, at least in homes, was really, really special. looking ahead, that may not even be able to be carrying on. So we got to figure something else different out with that to find a way to interact. But that's how we have gone so far. That was really well received. People appreciated the chance to be able to start when they wanted to. So most people still started about the same time when we normally do for service, but gave them a little freedom and flexibility in case people didn't show up on time to their homes and things like that. Since everything was pre-recorded, they could just click the links through and keep rolling as they had their own service. They said things were really easy to access on your YouTube channel, and then the YouTube playlist for the worship, and the prayer time. We had some guided things for that too, so they really appreciated that.
What was the hardest thing or the thing you tried that was like, this just isn't working right now?
Yeah.
Your epic fail for the week.
Yeah, so even though we tried to minimize the computer technology glitches, I had some other commitments, so I didn't get a chance to record the sermon until Sunday morning, and I thought I gave plenty of time, but two of my computers decided that was the time to update. That we're going to update right now, and so I was a little late in getting all that out, but it still was just in time for everyone to access. And then I suppose one of the other thing that was really kind of a bummer to me was that some of the elderly folks who don't have the access to technology in their own homes, I was hoping we could set them up with these other host homes. Many of them decided they were either A, not feeling well enough to go out anyway, or B, just wanted to isolate. And so we got to find a way to get them included somehow else.
Sure. Is there a grand Microsoft conspiracy with sending those updates out on Sunday morning, or I don't know, maybe
Something.
Something.
I think too, the other piece that we could do better and is that since I was recording just with my webcam on my MacBook, and so lighting was a little bit of an issue, and sound, and so we're going to work on that for next week.
Okay, cool. All right, so thinking about next week, that's good. Let's just talk a little bit about what we're going to try. Nate Sickler, we're going to go with you first. What are you guys trying new this next week as you kind of keep adjusting to things?
We're going to try and not have computers break. That's one thing.
Okay, good.
But then as far as Sunday services, the pre-service host time, we're going to continue to kind of play with that, figure out if there's more that we can do that can make an impact there, whether that's tell some story or things like that about what maybe a small group is doing, or how somebody has been impacting their neighbor during the midst of all that we're dealing with. We're just going to continue to explore what that little piece of the service could be for us. And then really beyond that is looking at the rest of the week. We're continuing to try and get all of our small groups to video conference like we are right now. A number of them are jumping in on that. Some of them are a little hesitant, and it just, I think, depends on where you're at with technology, but also I think where you're at with all that we're dealing with too, because there's those that are thinking this is going to be over in a week, and I'm just going to ride it out, and then I'll be able to be back with my small group in no time. And I hope that's the case, but we're planning to enable as many people to connect as possible, as consistently as possible. And so some of that midweek gathering piece is what we're working on.
Yeah, the longer this goes on, the more we have to think through beyond just a service and what this looks like for community and people worshiping in their daily life and their rhythm. So yeah, I definitely see that transition and maybe feel that transition a couple weeks into this, where we're asking those next questions if this does go on. So that's great. Nate Yoder, what about you and what you're thinking about for this week?
Yeah, so I hit a little bit of it there. We're going to work on some different camera and lighting and sound stuff. We're going to make my sermon notes available either electronically or just find a way to distribute them to each of the host homes ahead of time so that they have those, because some people miss those, having at least an outline out there, what's going to happen and what to look for. And then we're going to work on setting up those avenues for care for those non-technology users. We haven't been able to connect with them, at least for the Sunday morning worship, find a way to get them connected somehow. And that's the biggest piece. And then, like you guys were talking about already, we're going to be trying to figure out this piece. This is a little bit of a crisis. It feels like a big crisis right now, but with what's going on, I think we're going to be facing a lot more crises later on, a month from now, 2 months from now, of people that need care.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Nate. What about you, Greg? What are you guys trying this week that's different and how you're adjusting to that?
Well, last Friday, excuse me, last Friday, we made the difficult decision to cease live in church services. It was a really hard decision to make, and we talked and we prayed and kind of agonized over it, just knowing the impact that that'll have on our ability to minister to everybody. But being a young church and being a predominantly Hmong church, we have a lot of families, even just within our pastoral team, ministry team, and worship team, a lot of families with young kids and many of them with older parents living with them, multi-generational households, and there was just a lot of concern. So we are going on self-imposed social isolation, which means this weekend we're going to try and run a service from multiple people's homes. We're not exactly sure how it's going to look like. This week for sure, it will be a combination of pre-recorded and live. We haven't quite figured out how to live stream from multiple locations yet, but that's actually on my list to research. But for now, what we really do feel that we want some live components because that was so important. And so I'm going to be digging into OBS, the streaming software that we've been using, to look into the possibilities of streaming pre-recorded material in addition and in conjunction with some live streaming elements. So that's probably the biggest change. And honestly, man, it's Wednesday and we're still not entirely sure what this this Sunday is going to look like. But we've had a great model of it on television. We see the newscasts doing that. Late night TV, I think, has been fabulous for looking at what it could look like from home. So we're using those two avenues as kind of models of what it could look like for us. And then one more thing that I'm doing differently this week is I'm taking some rest. As the solo full-time pastor and one of the more tech-savvy people at the church, I have been working whatever is overtime for the last 10 days to try to figure out all of this. And I found that I was just getting exhausted and wasn't sleeping well. And I had a whole lot of personal anxiety that wasn't necessarily at the surface. So my interior world was really out of alignment. So I've taken about a day and a half off of not doing anything church, and it's been great. And I think because I'm one of the tech drivers in our church, I'm gonna have to be a lot more intentional about building in some Sabbath rest, some play, and some break from the relentless church work.
Cool. Greg, what exactly did you create during your rest time?
So yesterday I spent about 6 hours building a Lego Millennium Falcon.
And you were refreshed today.
Dude, it was glorious. I loved it. I just disappeared into the world of the Lego Millennium Falcon and the instructions. And as silly as it sounds, it was great because it completely absorbed me. And I don't think there's been a time in the last 10 days where I wasn't thinking about church stuff until yesterday and the Millennium Falcon.
That's great. Well, you've definitely got the Han Solo vibe happening right now. As
Yeah.
always, I have the Chewbacca vibe happening here. Just a little bit. If I filled in a little here and here, it'd be total Chewbacca. But I'm on my way. Let's see what happens with the rest of the quarantine. Maybe I'll be full on Chewbacca. So last thing we can talk about, and this is, I think, bigger picture, getting beyond maybe the first immediate things, but that's what is the biggest question you're still wrestling with. The change has been massive and quick, and it could be ongoing. And so I think we all have these big questions of what this needs to happen for the shape of the church. So Nate Yoder, let's start with you. What's your biggest question?
If I only got one here, I guess it is what is the what's the fallout of all this going to be, and how do we as a church rise to that? Not only for our people in our congregation, but also for our community and beyond, because there's going to be some real needs that are immediate right now that are starting to be met with food and things like that. but there's going to be some real other spiritual needs and physical needs that are going to need to be met later on as well with the economic downturn and everything.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big question. All right, Greg, what about you? Your biggest question that you're still holding on to?
Well, we're still very much focused on services right now. And so the big question we're asking is, what would a service look like that was designed from the ground up to be experienced online instead of in person? For 2 weeks, we've replicated our in-person experience online, and I don't think that's the best way to do it. We don't have an answer to this question, but that seems to be the critical question is because people are now consuming discipleship through a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And that means we have to restructure what a service looks like, what a Bible study looks like, what pastoral care looks like. So that's our big question now.
Sure. Good. Nate Sickler, what about you? What's the big question you're wrestling with still today?
How do we mobilize people when we can't get together? You know, that's, I think at the end of the day, the thing that we're wrestling most with, that we're trying to figure out how to do the digital service thing really well. In the same way that Greg was talking about, this is different. You know, as much as we've broadcasted services in the past, we've had live service as the primary means that people are connecting and the primary way that we're communicating, and the broadcast is thought about, but it's not the primary. So we're learning about that for sure. But really, I think the big question is, how do we help people when they want to, and at the same time keep them as safe as we can in a responsible way.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going to jump in and give you my big question I'm wrestling with as well. My big question is, how do we help people in this time of change, right? There's this massive change happening and people's lives are changing every day. Yet because of this change, how do we help them change in healthy ways, even though they're becoming more self-isolated? So the comparison I have, because I'm not pastoring a church, I'm working at a district office. I was like, this feels like when I was on sabbatical, like when I took a 3-month time away from my church and away from community, and set up some different rhythms to go about creating a spiritual life and renewing spiritual life and family life and relational life. And so I have this wonder of maybe this is like a forced sabbatical. So how do we help people live in a healthy way during this forced sabbatical time and set up rhythms for their life that'll maybe even be sustaining healthier long term after this is all done? So I'm going to write an article about that for our district newsletter. So that'll be coming out next week. Little plug, you know. But other than that, thank you guys so much for coming. We're going to talk next week again and see how it went this week and kind of continue to tell the story. Thank you guys so much for your hard work and being on the front lines and being so innovative. Thank you all for joining us on the Three Churches videocast. Again, I want to point you to our Facebook page where we are going to have some live interactions there where you can say what's working for you, what isn't working for you, and what challenges you're still dealing with, what questions you're still dealing with. So we'd love for this to be a place where we can interact and learn from each other how to be the church as we move forward. I know there's some lighthearted moments in the video cast, but we all know the severity and just the amount of sickness and death and anxiety that's going on, and what an opportunity for us to be the church in these moments. So I'm going to leave you with a prayer that I came across last night that I think is really fitting for us as we end the podcast today. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep these nights, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous. And all for your love's sake. Amen. We'll see you next week.